Okay, he was described as a God-fearing man, devout. How else is he described? What can we infer from the descriptions? He loved God, okay? Okay, he gave generously. Yeah, he gave generously to those in need. He was God-fearing. He prayed regularly. He had the fear of God. Okay, that's kind of code for he was converted to Judaism. Might have still eaten non-kosher food. Okay, that's a big thing. He was not just a soldier, he was a captain. He was in charge of, he was called a centurion, which means that he was in charge of 100 soldiers. And if we look in our Acts guidebook, there were 6 centuries to a cohort and 10 cohorts to a legion. So a legion was about 6,000 soldiers. I think the book says he might have been like a sergeant major. I wasn't in the army, so I'm not really sure what that relates to. But this guy wasn't just your basic grunt soldier. He was in charge of 100 men. That's a lot of men. So he's probably battle tested, probably a hard man, not somebody you would trifle with on the streets. Because normally you didn't rise to those ranks without seeing action and surviving through it. So. Yeah. Actually, a little bit later on, it does say that he sends a devout soldier, so he might have had some influence over a couple of the soldiers. But if we think about the way God works, this is a man to be admired and respected, in charge of 100 men. He probably interacts with the other 5 leaders of his cohort who have influence over 100 men each. So potentially, Cornelius has the opportunity to affect a lot of non-Jewish people. So we'll see how that plays out, 'cause it's pretty amazing. So he's a professional soldier. Caesarea is kind of like a county. If we go back to the map, Caesarea is up here. So he's probably stationed, it would be like the governor's building, mansion, palace, whatever you want to call it. So he's in a central location, has the potential to affect a lot of people. So he's also described as, in some versions it might say he was a proselyte. In other versions it just says that he's God-fearing. The difference is proselytes are converted and they get circumcised and they follow all the Jewish traditions first. God-fearing means that he's converted, not necessarily circumcised, and possibly don't keep with the strict Hebrew traditional foods, which all comes together later.
I guess the important thing is that he believes in God.
That's right. The big thing in there is that he's God-fearing, that he prays regularly, and that he gives generously. So these are good works that are evidence of his faith. It doesn't say that he's generous and makes a big production about helping people. He's not a hypocrite about it. This is the extension of his faith, rather than the show that the Sadducees and Pharisees were putting Okay, so going on at verse 3, it says, one day at about 3 in the afternoon, some verses might say the 9th hour, he has a vision. He distinctly saw an angel of God who came to him and said, Cornelius. Cornelius stared at him in fear. What is it, Lord? He asked. If Cornelius is a God-fearing man, why would he react in fear? Verse 4.
Whenever you see an angel, you feel that happens to every person that. A person sees an angel.
Yeah.
You feel that something that was not there now it is.
Yeah, it's supernatural.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, this angel was kind of not really a nice guy, because usually when like the angels appear to the shepherd, they say, "Be not afraid." They don't give Cornelius that courtesy. So I thought, it wasn't really nice for Cornelius to be a good guy. They're not really treating him very nice by giving him that whole "do not be afraid" thing. So the angel says, continuing on in verse 4, the angel answered, your prayers and gifts to the poor have come up as a memorial offering before God. Is that a good thing? Yeah, this is good. It's saying that like the aroma from a sacrifice, the scent of Cornelius's prayers and gifts were pleasing to God. Cornelius was doing the right things the right way. So God, signaling his pleasure with Cornelius, is getting ready to show Cornelius the path to salvation. He says in verse 5, now send men to Joppa and bring back a man named Simon who is called Peter. He is staying with Simon the tanner, whose house is by the sea. So the angel is telling Cornelius to send men from Jerusalem over to Joppa by the sea. It's 30 couple miles travel. How long is that going to take by foot? Yeah, it's a good day's trip. So this is a pretty significant undertaking. Why doesn't the angel give Cornelius an exact address? He just says, go to the tanner by the sea. Dawson? A lot of them are in hiding. There's actually a more obvious answer. Has anybody lived close to a tannery? You're going to smell it before you see it. Tanneries stink to high heaven. Okay? You don't need to give the address to the tannery because the nose will lead you to it. Okay. Okay, verse 7. When the angel who spoke to him had gone, Cornelius called 2 of his servants and a devout soldier who was one of his attendants. Okay, going back to what Dawson brought up. Apparently, Cornelius has had some effect on his soldiers. At least one of them has converted, otherwise he wouldn't be described as a devout soldier. So Cornelius has shared his faith with his soldiers. He prays regularly, and he gives generously to the poor. Sounds like the kind of guy you want on your team, right? That's why God is pleased with him and is about to show him the path to salvation. Okay, so verse 8, he told them everything that had happened and sent them to Joppa. There's no indication that Cornelius hemmed and hawed and was this just a crazy dream I had, nothing like that. He's told to send people, he gathers them and he sends them off with no hesitation. The next section is called Peter's vision. About noon the following day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. Okay, why would Peter go up to the roof of the house he was staying in to pray?
Nobody alone.
Okay, possibly wanted to be alone.
The roofs are flat, so you go up there to be all over just no way to communicate, just no distractions.
Okay. You wanted solitude? Some people think I'm like 10 feet closer to heaven, possibly. Some people think that. That's why a lot of people go to the mountaintops to worship. They feel like they're closer to God. You're not going to have the hustle and bustle of the household activities going on to distract you. If you lived in mud block, stone constructed houses, warm inside, or is it going to be cool? Actually, the houses are kind of hot and stuffy. You got your cooking fires going on in there. So the roof offered you fresh air. And it was also a little bit cooler. They might have had like a tent awning on top of it. So being on the roof under this awning would have been cooler than being inside the house. So there's lots of reasons he would go up to the roof to pray. In verse 10, it says, he became hungry and wanted something to eat. And while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. What does it mean to fall into a trance?
It's something that happens when you have a vision and you're sort of like, you lose everything else that's around you and you just focus on this one thing.
Okay.
Whatever the Lord is showing you at that particular time. Everything disappears. You're all alone. Right? So,
Okay. Yeah. So the important thing to draw from that is that kind of like all of the outside world is gone and he's just going to be focused on whatever vision he receives from this. Now let's keep in mind that it's noon, so it's lunchtime, and people are preparing food when he falls into this trance. Verse 11 says, he saw heaven opened and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its four corners. And I have a picture. This is an old painting. It's from an Italian painter named Domenico Fetti. It was painted in 1619. I'm not an art major, but I like art. And I love these old paintings of biblical scenes. Back in 1619, how many people had Bibles? Not many people. Usually it was only the church that had a Bible. How many people could read? Next to nobody outside of the clergy. So paintings like this were really important. This was the way you could tell biblical stories without having the printed version of the Bible. So I love these old paintings. So here we have Peter, or a very Europeanized version of Peter. You have to think about who the artist was and who his target audience was. So he's a rather Italian-looking Peter, dressed in kind of European clothing. But here's the sheet, and it has, you can see it's being held by angels, I guess, is what it's supposed to represent, since we don't see their feet touching anything. But it has sheep, it has cows, it has, I believe that's a rabbit, and that's it. Yeah, you can probably see it better on your screen than what's projecting up here. But this is the artist's interpretation of that verse. Something like a large sheet being held by four corners, being lowered down to where he can see. What is the importance or the significance of four corners? Okay, it represents the four cardinal points of the earth, north, south, east, west. It's kind of the idea of four seasons. The number four represents the whole world in scriptural lingo, coding kind of thing. It's a common expression we hear are the four compass points, the four winds blowing, and the four seasons. We have the four gospels. So it's this number of, not quite completeness, because the number three actually stands for completeness, but it represents like an entirety of something. So it's this idea that all of the animals in the world have been gathered up in this large sheet, and it's being displayed to Peter. Verse 12, it says it contained all kinds of four-footed animals, as well as reptiles of the earth and birds in the air. And then a voice told him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." In the original Greek, the verb that they use for kill is slay, which was kind of the verb that they used when they were talking about killing for a sacrifice. So really, in the original text, it was sacrifice and eat. And what does Peter say? "Surely not, Lord," Peter replied. "I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." So what kind of animals were impure and unclean? Snake. Let's go to Leviticus. Let's go to Leviticus, because that's where the rules are found. Leviticus chapter 11. Okay, I'll go ahead and get started while you guys are paging to it. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Say to the Israelites, of all the animals that live on land, these are the ones you may eat. You may eat any animal that has a split hoof, completely divided, and that chews the cud. There are some that only chew the cud or only have a split hoof, but you must not eat them. The camel, though it chews the cud, does not have a split hoof. It is ceremonially unclean for you. The coney, a rabbit, though it chews the cud, does not have a split hoof. It is unclean for you. The rabbit, though it chews the cud, does not have a split hoof. It is unclean for you. And the pig, though it has a split hoof completely divided, does not chew the cud. It is unclean for you. You must not eat their meat or touch their carcasses. They are unclean for you." Verse 9, "Of all the animals living in the water of the seas and the streams, you may eat any that have fins and scales. But all creatures in the sea or streams that do not have fins and scales, whether among them all the swarming things or among them all the other living things in the water, you are to detest. And since you are to detest them, you must not eat their meat, and you must detest their carcasses. Anything living in the water that does not have fins or scales is to be detestable to you. These are the birds you are to detest and not eat because they are detestable: the eagle, the vulture, the black vulture, the red kite, and any kind of black kite, any kind of raven, the horned owl, the screech owl, the gull, any kind of hawk, the little owl, the cormorant, the great owl, the white owl, the desert owl, the osprey, the stork, any kind of heron, the hoopoe, and the bat." Verse 20, "All flying insects that walk on all fours are to be detestable to you. There are, however, some winged creatures that walk on all fours that you may eat, those that have jointed legs for hopping on the ground. Of those you may eat any kind of locust, Katie did cricket or grasshopper, but all other winged creatures that have 4 legs you are to detest. Verse 24, you will make yourselves unclean by these. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean till evening. Whoever picks up one of their carcasses must wash his clothes, and he will be clean till evening. And 26, every animal that has a split hoof, not completely divided, or that does not chew the cud is unclean for you. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them will be unclean. Of all the animals that walk on all 4s, those that walk on their paws are unclean for you. Whoever touches their carcass will remain clean till evening. Anyone who picks up their carcasses must wash his clothes, and he'll be unclean till evening. They are unclean for you. It goes on. It goes on for lizards. If any animal that you are allowed to eat dies, anyone who touches up the carcass will be unclean till evening. It goes on for animals that crawl. So they are. So the prohibition directly prohibits certain animals. Yeah, that's what prohibitions do. They prohibit things. These verses specifically call out certain animals that you're not allowed to eat, the ones that you are. It's interesting that you're allowed to eat grasshoppers, but you're not allowed to eat shrimp or lobster. A lot of people like shrimp and lobster, right? I love shrimp. No pork chops either. If you're a Cajun, you're kind of out of luck because you can't eat crawdads. You can't eat alligator. That's some good eating. Some Bible scholars say that these laws are not really about nutrition or disease control. From people fed their pigs their trash and table scraps, so they would get a disease called trichinosis or trichinella. It's this little parasite that gets inside the flesh of the pig, and when you eat that, then you get that. If you look at the laws, most predatory animals would have been prohibited because, like, lions walk on paws, so you're not allowed to eat lion meat. A lot of the birds were either scavengers or would kill other animals and eat them. So a lot of predator animals were off limits. So the idea is not necessarily about disease control or nutrition, but these laws were really about restraint. And basically it's teaching restraint, and it was also a way to separate the Jewish people from the rest of the people in their community, because a lot of people would eat, especially if you look at, if we go back to Joppa, it's right on the coast. What are you going to find on the coast? You're going to find a lot of fish. You're going to find lobster. I think that octopus would have been off limits because it doesn't have fins or scales. A lot of cultures like Italians, Mexican, and Japanese are famous. They're like some of the biggest consumers of octopus. This man being from Italy probably would have been used to eating octopus. So shrimp would have been off limits. Crabs would have been off limits. All the bounty of the sea would have been, most of the bounty of the sea would have been off limits. Catfish would have been off limits because they don't have scales. They have more of a skin-like outside. So some of the non-kosher foods that a lot of cultures eat, obviously pig. A lot of cultures eat rabbits. Camel is eaten a lot in Africa. Camel were specifically considered off limits because it doesn't have the split hoof. It chews cud. It pulls up its cud, but it doesn't have the split hoof requirement. Oysters would have been off limits. So a lot of good things were considered off limits. But it's really, this is about discipline more than nutrition or disease control. Some of the other prohibitions that the Jews later made into this was not mixing meat and dairy products. So a cheeseburger would have been off limits because of a pagan ritual where you would boil a calf in the milk from the mother cow. And so they don't mix dairy products with their meat products. So a bacon cheeseburger, however delicious that sounds, would have been totally off limits. And you also notice that there were prohibitions against even touching these animals. It says you must not eat their meat or touch their carcasses. It says that several times. Why do you think it would be off limits to touch these animals? We can understand not eating them, but why would it be specifically called out that you can't touch these animals or their carcasses?
It won't make pits out of it.
What?
It won't make pits out of it.
Won't make pits out.
Pits.
Okay, yeah. So
It won't make them into pits.
okay, they won't make pets out of them. I think you're on the right track, Brenda. Why would you not want to make pets out of these animals? I mean, obviously, some of them are large animals. Some of them are predators. It's hard to make a pet out of an eagle. Why would you not be allowed to touch them? It's all about temptation. Okay? If I have a farm and I have a pig, let's say I have some Gentile friends coming over to my house for dinner. Not that that would happen that often, but I might be tempted to slaughter the pig and serve it up to my non-Jewish friends. What are you going to do with the leftovers? Nobody will notice if I take a little sneak, make a little sandwich at midnight. So it's all about the temptation of the availability of it. Keep all that stuff away and you won't be tempted by it. Okay. Dawson?
I just had a question. This question is for quite some time. Is this still the way the church is supposed to be adhering, or did that change for Jesus? What we're allowed to eat, not eat, which I love, the law, and all that stuff.
Give me 2 or 3 verses and I'll answer your question. That's exactly where we're leading to. Okay, so besides the temptation of having these animals around, it says you're not allowed to touch the animals. You're unclean. You have to wash your clothes. Cornelius was just sent to a tanner's house, right? How does a tanner get his skins? From dead animals, right? Tanners were not real popular people with the Jewish people because they violated a lot of these laws about the animals they touched and the animals that they skinned. So you have, the Jewish people thought that the Gentiles were dogs, right? Wouldn't associate with them, wouldn't even go into their house, usually avoided them. If they had a market stall, you would avoid them. So being a Gentile was bad enough. And now you add on being a guy that touches dead animals for a living. That was like the lowest of the low. That was, it was so bad that if you were courting a woman and you were engaged to be married and her family found out that you were a tanner and you didn't tell her to begin with, they could void the marriage. That's how poorly tanners were thought of in these days.
Well, Peter was staying at his house anyway.
Peter was staying in his house anyways. Okay, we're going to see the cultural ramifications of that in a minute. Okay, so let's go back to Acts. Acts chapter 10. Okay, so that's, to understand Peter's reaction, we had to kind of look at those laws. Peter says, "Surely not, Lord. I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." You can understand why he gets, I won't say belligerent, but he reacts so strongly when he's asked to do this. "Surely not, Lord." The voice spoke to him a second time. "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." We just got done saying that all these animals were unclean and impure. And now this angel's saying, do not call anything impure that God has made clean. How can God, it sounds like it's contradicting itself, right? How can God make something unclean?
The death of Christ took away the restrictions of the Old Testament law.
Okay. Can God tell a lie? Can God do anything wrong? No, it says nature. He's perfect, right? So how could a holy God make something that is unclean? So nothing that God has made is impure, unclean. That's what this angel's getting at, right? Nothing that God has made can be called unclean. Verse 16, this happened 3 times, and immediately the sheep was taken back to heaven. Now, my mother told me several times, she told me I have to tell you the same thing several times to get you to listen. Why was this scene repeated 3 times with Peter? Okay, so he remembers it. I just thought I saw Isaiah's chuckling, and then it made me make an association with something. I don't know if it has anything to do with it, but Peter denied Christ 3 times. So maybe 3 is Peter's magic number.
We just think you get it through his thick skull.
To get it through his thick skull. Okay. In the Bible, the number 3 is a sign of completeness. So maybe 3 times the message got completely through him. Okay, so verse 16, this happened 3 times, and immediately the sheep was taken back to heaven. Verse 17, while Peter was wondering about the meaning of the vision, the men sent by Cornelius found out where Simon's house was and stopped by the gate. They called out asking if Simon, who is known as Peter, was there. So we normally associate Peter's vision with food, right? Because it's kind of giving him permission to eat all these animals. I'd like to read a quote from Albert Mohler, the president of Southern Seminary. It says, as the book of Acts makes clear, Christians are not obligated to follow this holiness code. This is made clear in Peter's vision in Acts chapter 10, verse 15. Peter is told, what God has made clean, do not call common. In other words, there is no kosher code for Christians. There we go, Dawson. Christians are not concerned with eating kosher foods and avoiding all others. That part of the law is no longer binding, and Christians can enjoy shrimp and pork with no injury to conscience. Okay, so because of Peter's vision, that's why we can enjoy those shrimp-topped bacon cheeseburgers now, or we can go to Red Lobster. But there's a much deeper implication to this vision. It's not just about food. What else has God made besides these animals? What has God made in his image? He's made man in his image. Peter, because it's lunchtime and thinking, he can smell the food being cooked downstairs, his first thought goes to food, but there's a much larger implication to this vision. It's not just about food, it's also about people. This is the point where the way separates itself from the Jewish church. Right now, because of this vision, there's no more us versus them thinking to a Christian, to what's now becoming the Christian church. What God has made, we cannot call common. We can't discriminate Jews and Gentiles anymore. Paul goes on and further exemplifies that, saying there's no more slaves, no more, no free man, no slaves, no Jews, no Greeks. We're all one people now. This is that moment when this happens. And this is kind of where the way separates from being another offshoot of the Jewish church. This is where it becomes Christianity. This is where it breaks off. And I love this. While he's thinking about this vision in 17, while Peter was wondering about the meaning of this vision, the men sent by Cornelius found out where Simon's house was and stopped at the gate. Why did they stop at the gate? Why didn't they just come up and knock on the door?
They had to inquire, where does he live?
They know where he lives. The nose knows that this is the tannery. This is the right place, right? Why would they stop at the gate and not walk up to the house and knock on the door?
That's what he was, but my mother didn't really say, presumably he was, because there were cities, sometimes had gates, that's what came to mind. Not the tanner's house, whatever.
This is exactly, this little scene here, this is exactly what Peter's vision was trying to destroy. Here you have these God-fearing Jews of Cornelius, his soldier and his trusted servants, standing outside the gate of this Gentile person, this tanner, this lowest of the low, and going, hey, is Cornelius in there? Is Peter in there? They won't go up and even knock on his door because he's the lowest of the low of Gentiles. This is exactly the boundary that Peter's vision tears down, is supposed to destroy. How can God made all of these people in his image? How can you discriminate against them? How can you call them common? that little, if we could watch this on the TV screen, this is exactly what Peter's vision is trying to destroy. This keeping the Gentiles at arm's length kind of thing. It doesn't work in the Christian church. We're supposed to be all one people created in his image. That's why Jesus told his disciples to go forth to all nations, not just to the other Jews, but to all nations, to all people. Verse 19 says, while Peter was still thinking about the vision, the Spirit said to him, Simon, 3 men are looking for you. So get up and go downstairs. Do not hesitate to go with them, for I have sent them. This is exactly what his vision was trying to eradicate. Do not hesitate to go with them. I've sent them. Even though you're here with the lowest, a tanner, a Gentile that the other Gentiles kind of hold off, just go with them. So in 21, Peter went down and said to the men, I'm the one you're looking for. Why have you come? Verse 22, the men replied, we have come from Cornelius the centurion. He is a righteous and God-fearing man who is respected by all the Jewish people. A holy angel told him to have you come to his house so that he could hear what you have to say. Okay, that sounds good, right? He's a God-fearing man, being sent by a God-fearing man. And God, this is where God is rewarding Cornelius for his faithfulness, his steadfastness, his generosity, his regular prayers. He wants to hear from Peter firsthand. And what is Peter going to tell him? What is Peter going to tell Cornelius? He's going to share with him the gospel. Okay. This is Cornelius's reward for doing the right things the right way. He's going to hear firsthand account of the salvation plan. Verse 23, then Peter invited the men into the house to be his guests. Kind of a brave move. You're the guest and you're inviting other people in to be. It's going to be a little crowded, yeah. But there was no mention of hesitation by these devout Jewish men to come into the house of the tanner. Probably because the soldier was following orders. He was told to go get this guy, and that's what it entails. But there's no mention of hesitation.
Also not hesitation by the people in the house, Simon and Peter, to bring in a soldier, a Roman soldier, which was also
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of prejudices being broken down right here. You have a Roman soldier. Well, yeah, he was a Roman soldier. He was, earlier he was described as being from the Italian regiment. So not only was, the Roman soldiers pulled in people from everywhere, but if he was in the Italian regiment, he was probably from Italy, so he would have been a real Roman soldier. So they've got that against him, because did any of the Jewish people like the Roman soldiers? No, they were an occupying army force in their country. They were the bad guys in all this. These were the guys that the Messiah was supposed to come in and throw out when he came to his glory. So we have Roman soldiers. We have servants that are serving this Roman soldier. And the only thing worse than the occupying force are the people that are being employed by the occupying force, because they're kind of considered turncoats because you're helping the enemy. And now you have them going into the house of a Gentile and a tanner at that. When you look at the nitty-gritty of this, this is a lot of prejudices being broken down. And I think this is a very underappreciated section of the Bible, because it doesn't, obviously you can't make all these letters in red, but I think it should be in bold, because this is where all of these bad feelings about Jews and Gentiles gets broken down. This is where we're now granted the freedom to, not that it's always good, I'll be the first to admit, being able to get everything you want isn't always good. But now we don't have to be so concerned about, am I going to lose my salvation if I eat shrimp? Am I going to lose my salvation because I go to Red Lobster to celebrate my son's birthday? We don't have to concern ourselves about things like that. That should free us up to consider more holy things. So, and again, this is the point where Christianity kind of becomes its own. So it's kind of underappreciated, I think. It's only 10:30, but we're at a really convenient breaking point. I'm afraid if we start the next section, we won't get through it all, and that makes for a messy handoff for Nathan next week. So that's all I have prepared for this morning. Is there any questions, any comments?
Yes, it so happens that my brother-in-law visited me a few years ago here, and he was Catholic, and then from there, for my sister, he went to this Pentecostal church, which he had, and during the middle of the service, he stands up and starts speaking in tongues. So he became a real convert. Now, later, he continued at that time. He was doing his teaching, and he became a pastor. And then when he visited me, I didn't think anything about it. I was Christian too, so I made partnerships. He didn't go to that because he was telling me how much it was sinful. And I said, no, it isn't. I brought this perfection up. And he said, no, that's so strictly dealing with people, different people, It doesn't matter the nationality. I said, well, I guess it does that, but it also brings up the fact that, there's something we never agreed to that. So it was one of those situations, okay, I finally said, okay, here's the thing. Even if it is unclean in this particular time, before I eat every food that I'm going to eat, I pray for the Lord's blessing on me. So to me, if it's going to be, if the Lord blesses it, it's going to be good for me. I have no problem with it. And he said, oh, well, for now, you pray because you're going to sin. Yeah, let's leave it at that. We never did settle that, but I never offered them for you.
Yeah, there's, I think when I was researching this, I think the Universal Church of God, they still keep most of the kosher laws because they see this more as saying that Jewish people shouldn't discriminate against the Gentiles more than saying that they are released from the dietary laws of Leviticus. There's people that still debate it, and Paul goes on and talks about eating meat from animals that were sacrificed at the temple, and basically he says, if somebody's gonna have a problem with it, don't serve it to them. Don't make your brothers stumble. I deal a lot with Muslim students, and we're always real careful not to include something that has pork in it, because you just don't intentionally make your brothers stumble. If they're going to have a problem with it, don't try to sneak it in. That doesn't glorify God. That just makes you a jerk, So we're real careful not to serve pork at our school, and it's this whole idea of not wanting to make somebody else stumble. Melvin, you've been waiting patiently.
First one experience, some time ago, with a family out here. And this guy's mother was visiting. So she went with us, and anyway, we went to this restaurant. And she went to the restroom, and she was all over. And so, what she done, ordered for her favorite dish, pork chops.
Hmm.
And so she came back out from this, swallowed the pork chop, ordered for her. And she looked at that plate of food, turned it upside down, and stormed out that restaurant like a maniac. And I kept thinking, what a good it was. So he, the son didn't know that she had joined an outfit that forgives. And it wasn't a great thing. So sometimes we can really work our testimony about the way we act in certain things.
Yeah.
And Paul said, eat what you were set before you for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, it's not to be totally biological about it, but the food that we eat, it goes into our stomachs and processed, and whether it's clean or unclean food, it's not that what makes your heart impure. It's your thoughts and your deeds that really make you impure, not the foods that we eat.
Actually, pork is rather unclean. My younger son, while attending Wright State, he got a job at the meat department at Myers, there by the university. And he used to eat a lot of pork just like me. But after working there for about 2 or 3 years, he said he would not touch pork. He said it's great. Dirty meat.
Yeah.
So it is, you see the food that development, I cook it good. It's like protein.
Yeah.
I make fun of it because yeah.
With the pork, it was the trichinosis, the parasites that they would get is the big thing. But my mom told me that when she, like her last year of high school and a couple of years, she worked in a donut bakery. She worked in a bakery. And she said that after a couple of years, after she left, it was several years before she could eat donuts again because, she just got tired of the smell of the bakery. So, much like your nephew that worked in the meat deli. So, yeah, so these, even today, there's a lot of debate about this vision. Some scholars think that it's only about the foods that we eat and not how we treat other people. Some people think that it is um, that it doesn't put aside the requirement for the Jewish dietary laws. To me, the angel tells Peter to kill these animals and eat. And so to me, that gives us permission to eat any of these animals. But to me, the real important part is the fact that we're not to consider any people unclean because God made them in his own image. So that's the big takeaway for me. Melvin?
Everything we need comes out of her. And even on the bottom, and that's your health.
Yeah.
Yeah, as Jesus said, it's not what goes into the mouth that's not the man, but what comes out. So
Yeah, it's
that goes in, like I said, it's in everything that goes in, it's like, in grass.
Yeah. It's our thoughts and our heart that makes us impure, not the foods that we eat. Dawson?
When I was young and growing up, I was always taught by my parents, no matter what was sitting there in front of me, pray to God, thank God for that food that's put in front of you. And you ask God to bless that food in your body. And you ask for God to bless that one who help bring it to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way I was raised. So that's the reason why I asked my question earlier. Is it still considered bad? And I've never read this, but I'm glad you touched on this subject today for myself. Because I love shrimp, and cheeseburgers, and all that stuff too.
Yeah.
But I just want to get all the way to pray. No matter if I'm in a restaurant or any place, I'm praying. And asking God to see if His will be done on every time.
Yeah.
If I get a work spot, and I'm out there in the wilderness, and I see a snake coming by, and I'm that hungry. Believe.
Yeah. Or you go to Buffalo Bill's in Piqua and they serve rattlesnake. You don't have to be trapped in the wilderness to enjoy it.
Well, let's talk about later. Paul jumps over the year. Good, just talking about when the Jews showed up, Peter changed the way he sees the Jews.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, even though Peter gets the message firsthand that you're not to consider us and them because we're all God's people, he's worried about the court of public opinion, and he refuses to eat with the Gentiles afterwards when there's other Jews present. But that's for another lesson. So, Melvin, would you please close us in a word of prayer?
Well, we have to do it again. Pray with grace, mercy, and revealing good. And that's what we ask today. We witness that we worship you and help us to see in contact with what we have.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. So next week we'll be looking at 23 through probably the end of the chapter, the 10th. Oh, Nathan should be back next week.
Yeah. Reminder.
I figured it would be a little more volumes.